Hey, it's Mika. Happy Halloween to all of you that celebrate it. I just quickly wanted to say thank you. For the first time ever, one of my videos has hit 1,000 views, which is a lot for a channel that only started a couple months ago. I hope you guys continue supporting me, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. Anyway. Love Allergy by Crossroads Right. I think I'm allergic to Bakugou, Todoroki says as a way of greeting, walking into Izuku's room without as much as a knock. Without missing a beat or looking up from his phone, Hitoshi says, "Mood?" What? I'm allergic to Bakugou, Todoroki repeats, sitting down on Izuku's desk chair and spinning it closer to the bed. Izuku watches him rest his elbows on his thighs and put his head in his hands, the perfect picture of despair. Are you okay? Izuku asks, because Hitoshi is clearly going to be no help here. When Todoroki doesn't answer, Izuku raises himself up on his hands from where he's sprawled, tummy down on top of Hitoshi, and pokes the top of Todoroki's head experimentally. "Todoroki-kun," he prods. And then, when no amount of poking makes him raise his head, Izuku flicks him in the soft spot on the top of his head. "Ow," says Todoroki, with no inflection, throwing Izuku a withering look through the gaps in his fingers. "What's wrong?" Izuku asks, very, very patiently. "Allergies." "You can't be allergic to a person, Todoroki-kun." "You can if it's Bakugou," Hitoshi unhelpfully pipes up. "I, for one, feel like throwing up every time I'm forced to look at him." "Hush up," Izuku commands, pointing a crooked and threatening finger at Hitoshi. Hitoshi snorts a little and turns his focus back to his game. "He has a point," says Todoroki, sounding contemplative. No, he doesn't. Izuku pushes himself up and sits down on his bed, because this is already a mess and he feels like he should be somewhat upright for it. "What happened?" "I sneezed on him," Todoroki declares, as if that explains everything. "That's hilarious," Hitoshi says, tonelessly. Izuku can't even berate him because he's right. The picture of Todoroki sneezing directly on Katsun is hilarious. But Izuku is trying to be a supportive friend. So he asks, "Explain?" "I took notes," Todoroki says, very seriously. "Notes?" "Notes," he nods. "When I don't know what's going on, I ask myself, what would Midoriya do? And since I'm not particularly fond of breaking my bones, I took mental notes of all my symptoms to reach the only logical conclusion." Izuku stares at him, mouth slightly open, unsure where to even start with that one. "Todoroki, you're an absolute joy to talk to," Hitoshi says, over suppressed laughter. "You're not helping," Izuku tells Hitoshi, despairing a little. Hitoshi looks over the brim of his phone to quirk an eyebrow at Izuku, and says, "I'm not trying to." "I hate you." "Love you too." "You two are such good friends," Todoroki notes. Izuku snaps back towards him. "We're literally dating." Todoroki frowns like this was news to him. "Oh, congratulations," he says, sounding pleasantly surprised, as if he wasn't there for the confession. As if Izuku didn't use his shoulder to cry on about his hopeless little crush on Hitoshi. He opens his mouth, closes it, opens it again. "Not worth it," Hitoshi pipes up, and Izuku decides he's absolutely right. There's more pressing matters, and Todoroki is already burning enough of Izuku's brain cells as is. "You were telling me about your symptoms?" he prompts. "Lightheadedness." Todoroki starts ticking off his fingers. Nausea, fever, intermittent quirk outbursts, tightness in my chest area, unexplained adrenaline rushes. Those are not allergy symptoms, Izuku says gently, starting to have a very faint idea of what's happening here. Todoroki nods, like he knows this. At first I thought I had a cold, but it only happens around him and it's been going on for months. I also went to Recovery Girl, but she said there was nothing wrong with me and gave me a lollipop. It was mango flavored. So, obviously, I must be allergic to him. Izuku starts, and cuts himself off, because where does he even begin with all of that? He leans back a little against Satoshi, and feels his body shaking. Izuku really appreciates that he's at least trying not to lose it laughing, even if it makes it hard for Izuku to remain serious, because Todoroki looks honestly concerned. But then again, in their 3 years together at UA, Todoroki has thoroughly mastered looking completely serious while fucking with them. Let's, go through them one by one. You said being next to Kachan caused you nausea? Satoshi finally loses his battle against laughter and starts to howl like a hyena. It's an absolute tragedy how cute Izuku finds that. Yes, Todoroki confirms, unbothered. Izuku throws a pillow at Hitoshi's face, without looking away from Todoroki, and asks, "Can you expand on that?" Sometimes I'm near him, and I feel a feeling. It feels like nausea. Hitoshi clutches his stomach, wheezing. "Give me a second," Izuku says. He climbs out of bed, slides his arms under Hitoshi, easily picking him up. He then marches towards the room's door, opens it, and unceremoniously dumps Hitoshi in the hallway. Hitoshi is still laughing like a madman, so Izuku just leaves him to it, closing the door gently in his face. He sits back on his bed. "Okay, but is it a car-sick type of nausea or an anxiety type of nausea?" Todoroki frowns. "Anxiety causes you nausea?" Yeah, it can." Todoroki frowns harder. "That's not it. I only get anxious when I'm scared, and I'm not scared of Bakugou." He says it like the mere concept of being afraid of Kachan is ridiculous. But it's not car-sick nausea either. "Can you give me an example of when Kachan made you feel nauseous?" Izuku asks, trying very hard to ignore how idiotic this whole conversation sounds. How did they even get here? Izuku doesn't know, and frankly, he doesn't want to think about it. He'll just wrap this tightly in a box called "Kachan's bullshit, I have to deal with it," and kick it under his metaphorical bed where it can only haunt him at night. Todoroki has his deep-in-thought face on, complete with fingers on his chin. Izuku wonders sometimes if Todoroki bases all of his facial expressions on emojis. Last weekend, when he walked in with the hot pot. Izuku remembers this because Kachan refuses to be ignored in any room he enters, and that absolutely includes the common area of the dorms. Last week, Kachan had gone out grocery shopping with his friend group, and instead of opening the dorm's front door like a normal person, he'd kicked it in, holding an unreasonably big pot over his head and cackling maniacally, as he shouted loud enough to be heard on the 4th floor. "Look what I just got! You'll fucking wish you were this sexy!" Izuku remembers, very faintly, Todoroki's expression. He had taken the wide eyes and upward tilt of his lips as amused bewilderment, but now he thinks it might have been something else entirely. "Todoroki-kun," Izuku says gravely, and puts both his hands on Todoroki's shoulders. He looks him deeply in the eyes. "Am I dying?" Todoroki asks, very seriously. And just as seriously, Izuku replies, "Worse. You have a crush on Ka-chan." "Oh," Todoroki says, and goes back to hiding his face in his hands. Izuku pats him consolingly on the head a couple times, waiting him out. In that time, the door to Izuku's room opens again, and Hitoshi lets himself in. He stares at Izuku patting Todoroki on the head for a full 2 minutes, before he asks, "So, what's the verdict?" Izuku opens his mouth, but before he can even think of sounding the words out, Todoroki looks Hitoshi dead in the eye, and with all the gravity of the situation, intones, "I'm emotionally horny for Bakugou." Hitoshi stares at him in what Izuku reads as utter disbelief and abject horror. Izuku just despairs very quietly, and privately at the fact he was just forced to hear those words in that order. There's something just very off-putting to him about hearing the word horny and Ka-chan mentioned in the same sentence. Hitoshi finally seems to recover from the whiplash those words coming from Todoroki's mouth caused, and says, "Rest in peace, my good bitch." "Thanks," Todoroki says, earnestly. Izuku would love nothing more than to rewind time to half an hour ago, when he didn't have to deal with any of this. But alas, his life is never that easy, and the gods constantly punish him for his hubris. Hitoshi lays back down on Izuku's bed and picks his phone up from where it had fallen during the laughing fit. "Todoroki-kun, are you alright?" Todoroki looks at him, and only years of being friends clues Izuku in that he looks upset. It's noticeable in the most imperceptible downwards bow of his lips, and the way he clasps his hands in front of him, squeezing and releasing in a self-soothing motion. "What should I do?" Todoroki asks. "Well..." Izuku starts trailing off a little, because isn't that the question? The answer would probably be easier if this wasn't about Ka-chan, which can be said about way too many things in Izuku's life, unfortunately. But this is about Ka-chan, and this is about Todoroki, two of Izuku's closest and dearest friends. Usually, you have two options. You can ignore it and hope it goes away, or confess and risk rejection. "Or you can kill him," Hitoshi adds. Todoroki tilts his head as if considering it. No, you cannot," Izuku rushes to say, before he turns to Hitoshi and pokes him meanly on the cheek. "Did you consider killing me when you had a crush on me?" There's a telling silence, before Hitoshi says, "Briefly." Izuku grabs a pillow and slams it down on his face. "Mean? You've lost your boyfriend privileges." It's an empty threat, and they know it, so Hitoshi limits himself to pull the pillow off his face, and give Izuku a smarmy, amused little grin. Izuku pinches him on the cheek, and snubs him by turning back to Todoroki. Todoroki goes from looking mildly upset to looking utterly amused. "If this is what being in a relationship is like," he starts calmly, "then I think confessing is my only option." Izuku tilts his head, not really understanding Todoroki's train of thought. How does him smacking Hitoshi make him think, "Oh, yes, that's something I want"? There's something very intimate about annoying the absolute shit out of someone, Hitoshi says sagely. Todoroki nods solemnly. Maybe that's why every single night I stay awake thinking about the best way to annoy the hell out of Bakugou. That is both very sexy and incredibly stupid of you. I'm impressed, Izuku says, before he remembers to turn his empathy filter on, and then quickly slapping a hand over his mouth. Thanks, I think so too, Todoroki says, seeming nonplussed by Izuku's comment. Izuku clears his throat loudly. Moving on. We're gonna need a plan to seduce Ka-chan, Izuku says, and regrets it almost immediately. Lucky for our collective sanity, Bakugou is already whipped for pretty boy over there. Izuku whips his head back to Hitoshi so fast, he hears something in his neck crack. Explain, he demands. Yesterday, I saw Todoroki steal one of Bakugou's disgusting-tasting yogurts right out of his hands and eat the whole entire thing in front of him without being murdered in cold blood. Bakugou didn't even yell that much. His face when I did it was hilarious, though, Todoroki says, looking, all might help them, incredibly fond. Aren't you lactose intolerant? Izuku asks fearfully. The manic glint in Todoroki's eye only spells trouble. Yes, Todoroki says, sounding way too proud of himself. The worst part is he didn't even have a spoon, so he just scooped it out, froze it, and then chewed on it. Incredible. Izuku is in awe. Truly. Thanks. It took me 3 weeks of planning to think of it. A true tragedy that Todoroki has absolutely shit taste, or I'd date him myself, Hitoshi says. Izuku can't even be jealous about it, because honestly, mood, he says. Tragic, Todoroki says solemnly. But how do I get him to date me? And those are the magic words to activate every single romantic bone that Izuku has in his body, making him lunge forward to grab both of Todoroki's hands and fervently state, "You have to confess." Todoroki leans slightly backwards in a way, and Izuku doesn't know if it's because he was surprised by Izuku's sudden fervor, or if it's because Izuku's forward momentum would have made him smack his forehead directly onto Todoroki's nose, were it not for Toshi's fast reflexes and his hand grabbing the back of his shirt and keeping him from toppling forwards. Whichever one it is, Izuku doesn't care much, because if there's something he loves, it's a good love confession. How? Todoroki asks. I have notes. Of course you do, Hitoshi mutters fondly, and keeps his hand fastened around Izuku's shirt as he leans precariously off the end of the bed to reach underneath it for said notes. Izuku opens his notebook and turns it towards Todoroki, on the page with a color-coded infographic about the perfect conditions for a successful confession. I did some extensive research using several control groups, especially among third years and teachers, since they're most likely to have successful relations, and I found every way to confess successfully, with separate methods for requited and requited crushes. The last one takes a bit of covert emotional manipulation, but, what doesn't? Terrifying, Todoroki says, like it's a compliment, eyeing the graphics with interest, even if Izuku can tell he doesn't understand any of it. Please tell me more. Give me 2 hours. I can write you a 10-page step-by-step plan on how to successfully confess to Ka-chan. Todoroki sighs and leans back on the chair, head falling over the back in such a way that Izuku can see straight up his nose. It's too long, he complains, and reading is a lot of work. Well, Izuku trails off, frowning. He has no idea how to do anything without extensive research and planning. Or, and I know this sounds ridiculous, Hitoshi thoughts, you could just do it. Todoroki raises his head again. I can? Yeah, Hitoshi says. At the same time, Izuku cries, No! They look at each other. Hitoshi raises an eyebrow. Izuku scrunches up his nose. You can't just do it. It has to be romantic. It has to be planned. I don't think Bakugou cares much about romance, Hitoshi points out. Which, fair, but still, confessions are a big deal, and Izuku thinks that Hitoshi should care more about them. You don't know that. Maybe he does. Deep down. Very, very, very deep down. Hitoshi gives him a pityingly incredulous look. Izuku pouts, if only just a little. If he likes him, he'll say yes no matter what, Hitoshi reasons. And then to Todoroki he says, even if you have snot running down your face and sob the words out. I was emotional! Stop making fun of me! Izuku complains. Hitoshi pinches his cheek, and Izuku tries to bite his hand. My point is, not everyone needs to take 3 months and 85 not dates to confess properly. Give him some flowers, write him a letter, tell him how you feel. You know, like non-manic obsessive people do. First of all, it was 87 dates. Second of all, you still said yes, so it worked. It did because I have the patience of a Buddhist monk and think you're cute. Now imagine putting Bakugou through that. Izuku takes a second to consider this. And, okay, alright, maybe he went a teensy bit overboard with confessing to Hitoshi. When he considers putting Bakugou in the same situation, he can only come up with 2 outcomes. Either Kachan gets annoyed with being forced out of his routine so often, or he goes along, completely oblivious towards Todoroki's feelings. Kachan might be awe-inspiring, and one of the smartest people Izuku knows, but emotionally, he has the intelligence of a particularly pointy rock. Most likely both outcomes would happen at the same time. Kachan would get annoyed and stay oblivious. Okay, I see what you mean, Izuku concedes. He turns to Todoroki, who has just quietly, and with no small amount of amusement, been watching the back and forth between them. Hitoshi's right, but you still need to make it nice. And you have to be direct about your feelings, or Kachan won't get it. Todoroki considers Izuku's words, and then nods seriously. Bakugou is an idiot. I'll spell it out for him clearly. And don't worry, Midoriya. I'll work hard. Those words both comfort Izuku, and fill him with an impending sense of dread. Todoroki gets up, says, "Thanks for the help." And just as he walked in, he walks out, leaving Hitoshi and Izuku staring at the door. For some reason, Izuku starts, I have a weird feeling about this. No matter what happens, Shinsou says consolingly, patting Izuku on the shoulder. It's probably going to be funny as hell. Izuku is dating a ridiculous person, and he cannot wait to ask him to move in and co-adopt a cat after graduation. But that's still a ways away. For right now, Izuku flops back down on top of him, knocking all the air out of Hitoshi, and making him groan at having to take all of Izuku's considerable weight. Passing my Nintendo. I have to water my oddish. The day Todoroki confesses, it's beautiful and sunny, with a strong spring breeze blowing through the trees. Izuku knows this because he's snooping, hiding around the corner of one of the training gym complexes, as he watches Todoroki and Kachan stand across from each other. Stray cherry blossom petals are blown around them, and Izuku could not have hoped for a better setting. Hitoshi is a steady weight on his back, chin pressed against the top of Izuku's head. They are both perhaps a little too invested in this, but for wildly different reasons. Izuku is hoping to witness something romantic, and to see 2 of his closest friends get a step closer to happiness. Hitoshi is just here for a laugh, and for possible blackmail material against Bakugou. They both wait with bated breath. So, you wanna fight or what? I don't have all day. Izuku really wishes he could have expected better from Kachan, but alas. I have something to say, Todoroki says, taking a letter out of his pocket. It's important. He extends the letter towards Kachan, and Izuku stops breathing, leaning forward and straining his ears in anticipation. This is it. This is it. Kachan takes the letter from the envelope and stares at it. After a beat of stunned silence, his head snaps back up towards Todoroki, eyes wide, mouth slightly ajar. Todoroki takes a deep breath, looks deeply and steadily into Kachan's eyes, and says, "You make me sick. Want a date?" Izuku damn near topples over to the ground, both in utter disbelief and due to Hitoshi's full weight suddenly settling on him as his boyfriend shakes in uncontrollable laughter.
Did you just fucking write "I like you" on a limited edition ultra rare hollow false silver age All Might trading card, you fucking degenerate?
Kachan demands. "It's your favorite All Might era," Todoroki answers simply, and Izuku physically feels a piece of his soul die. "If you ever do something like that to me," Izuku whispers to Hitoshi, "I'll snap your neck." This somehow prompts Hitoshi to ugly snort through his laughter.
"I cannot fucking believe you. And what the fuck was that about me making you sick after giving me something like this?"
He brandishes the desecrated All Might trading card. "Midoriya told me."
"Of course. Stupid ass Deku. Of fucking course."
"I should be clear about my emotions. And you make me feel ill. Like there's bees in my stomach."
"Bees? Do you mean butterflies?"
Kachan asks incredulously. No, I'm pretty sure they're bees. Very angry bees," Todoroki clarifies. Behind Izuku, with reverence dripping from every word, Hitoshi says, "This is the best moment of my life." There's a moment of silence as Katsuki looks at him with the exact same face he had looking at the deep-sea fish in the aquarium. Utter confusion, a sort of wondrous joy, and also mild disgust.
"You are..."
Kachan starts, entire face twisting into a displeased scowl.
"The stupidest person I've ever met in my entire goddamn life, and that's saying something, considering the group of morons I hang out with. What the absolute fuck went through your head to decide this was the way to confess? I'm honestly goddamn godsmacked at the idiocy I've witnessed in the last 10 minutes. I feel like I've actively lost brain cells having to listen to you. You're a constant pain in my ass, not to mention I should put you 6 feet under for what you just did to this All Might card."
Kachan takes a second to breathe through his tirade, which Todoroki takes as an opportunity to ask, "Is that a yes?"
"Fucking obviously it's a yes. You still have your pretty face intact, don't ya?"
"You're pretty too," Todoroki says, and the smile that graces his lips and crinkles his eyes makes Izuku want to cry at just how happy he looks.
"Shut up. Aren't you supposed to kiss me or something?"
"No idea. This is the first time I've liked someone." Even from all the way over here, Izuku can see how red Kachan's ears get.
"Figures,"
Kachan says, and then grabs Todoroki by the ears and pulls him down for a kiss. That's... Izuku frowns at the way they're tilting their heads in what looks like an extremely uncomfortable position. "Sweet?"
"That's one word for it,"
Hitoshi remarks. Izuku turns away from Todoroki and Kachan because he's starting to feel like a voyeur. Also, watching them kiss is painful just because of how bad they both seem to be at it.
"Her job here is done,"
Izuku declares, proudly, feeling all warm and fuzzy inside at two of his friends getting together.
"But we didn't do anything," Hitoshi says.
"And to celebrate," Izuku continues, pretending he didn't hear him, "we're going out for cake." Hitoshi, who has a sweet-toothed to rival a spoiled child, immediately throws an arm around Izuku's shoulders and pulls him close, walking both of them towards Yue's gates.
"Our job here is done."